Dakota Territory, 1875. Miles Benton squinted at the darkening horizon from his post on the porch of the Silver Creek Ranch house. At 25, his face still held the smoothness of youth, though 2 years of working as foreman had etched faint lines around his eyes, the mark of a man who spent his days beneath the unforgiving prairie sun. His lean frame carried the confident strength of someone who'd grown up breaking horses rather than sitting behind schoolhouse desks. "Storm's coming," he muttered to himself, brushing dust from his faded blue shirt. The summer drought had turned the land brittle, and the ranch couldn't afford another season without rain. But something about this particular storm unsettled him. Its speed, perhaps, or the strange greenish tint to the clouds. Miles had built his life around a simple truth: the frontier forgave no weakness. His father had taught him that lesson at 10, when a band of rustlers left their family homestead in ashes. Since then, Miles had constructed his existence around self-reliance. No attachments meant nothing to lose, a philosophy that had kept him alive through Cheyenne winters and cattle drives to Dodge City. "Riders coming," called Hank, the oldest hand on the ranch, interrupting Miles' thoughts. 3 wagons, moving fast ahead of that storm. Miles grabbed his Winchester from beside the door. Strangers meant trouble more often than not. "Get the men," he instructed, striding toward the gate. The lead wagon approached at a dangerous pace, wheels bouncing over the rutted trail. As it drew closer, Miles could see a figure struggling with the reins, a woman, her bonnet torn away by the wind, hair streaming behind her like a chestnut banner. "The bridge is out," Miles shouted, running toward the approaching wagon. "Stop!" The woman yanked desperately on the reins, but the horses, spooked by the oncoming storm, refused to respond. With the washed-out creek bed ahead, Miles had seconds to act. He launched himself at the lead horse, grabbing its bridle and pulling with all his strength. The wagon slewed sideways, tipping precariously before settling back on its wheels mere yards from the eroded edge. When the dust cleared, Miles found himself staring into the widest, most startled green eyes he'd ever seen. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he demanded. The young woman's face flushed. She couldn't be more than 20, with a delicate oval face framed by that remarkable chestnut hair, now disheveled from her wild ride. Her traveling dress, once a respectable navy blue, was streaked with dust and sweat. "The storm," she managed, voice trembling. "We were trying to outrun it." Miles looked back at the other wagons, now stopping behind the first. They were loaded with furniture, trunks, and what appeared to be farming equipment. "I'm Ruby Walsh," she continued, gathering her composure. "These are my brothers and their families. We're settling on the Crawford homestead." Miles felt his jaw tighten. "Crawford Place has been abandoned for 2 years. It's barely standing." "It's ours now," Ruby said with quiet determination. "We have the deed." Before Miles could respond, the first fat raindrops began to fall, and the wind picked up with alarming force. "Argue later," he shouted over the rising gale. "That's a twister forming. Get your people to our storm cellar, now." For 2 hours, Miles sat shoulder to shoulder with Ruby Walsh in the cramped underground shelter while the tornado tore across the prairie. The other ranch hands huddled with Ruby's brothers and their wives and children, 15 souls pressed together in damp, terrified silence. Miles couldn't help noticing how Ruby comforted the children, singing softly to distract them from the howling wind above. When little Sarah, his cook's daughter, began crying, Ruby produced a small carved horse from her pocket and placed it in the girl's trembling hands. "My father made this," she explained, loud enough for Miles to hear. He said a wooden horse carries dreams across the prairie. When their eyes met briefly in the lantern light, Miles looked away first. Something about her steadiness unsettled him more than the storm above. When they finally emerged, the main ranch house stood intact, but the bunkhouse roof had partially collapsed, and 2 of the Walsh wagons lay on their sides, contents scattered across the yard. "You can stay in the main house until the storm season passes," Miles found himself offering, surprising even himself. "It's not safe at Crawford's place, storm shelter there collapsed years ago." Ruby surveyed the damage, her face betraying nothing. "We accept," she said simply, "but we'll work for our keep." That night, as Ruby helped serve dinner to the combined households, Miles watched her from across the room. There was something different about her, a quiet determination lacking in the saloon girls of Deadwood or the merchants' daughters who occasionally passed through. Her dress was plain, her manner direct. When she caught him looking, she didn't simper or look away coyly. She simply nodded, acknowledging him without pretense. Miles told himself his interest was merely practical. The Walshes would move on to their homestead soon enough. Attachment was a luxury the frontier didn't permit, especially for a ranch foreman with responsibilities to his employer and men. But as summer heat gave way to autumn chill, the Walsh family remained at Silver Creek. Ruby's brothers helped rebuild the bunkhouse and mend fences, while Ruby herself transformed the neglected ranch house. Curtains appeared in windows that had been bare for years. The perpetual dust that coated every surface seemed to retreat before her determined assault. Miles found himself inventing reasons to return to the house during the day, reports that could have waited, questions about supplies that didn't need immediate answers. Each time, Ruby would look up from whatever task occupied her hands, those green eyes meeting his directly. One evening in late September, Miles returned from a 3-day ride to find Ruby alone on the porch, mending a shirt by the last light of sunset. "Where is everyone?" he asked, settling his tired frame into the chair beside her. "At the Crawford place," she replied, not looking up from her stitching. "The roof is finally repaired. We'll be moving there next week." Miles felt an unexpected hollowness in his chest. "That's good," he managed. "You've been waiting a while." Ruby's hand stilled. "Will you miss us?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "The men will miss your cooking," he deflected. "Little Sarah will cry for days." Ruby nodded, returning to her mending. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. "There's a social at the church in town next Saturday," Miles found himself saying. "Dancing and such. You might enjoy it before you leave." Ruby's needle paused mid-stitch. "Are you inviting me, Mr. Benton?" Miles cleared his throat. "If you'd like to go, I could escort you. Proper thing to do." When she finally looked up, her expression was unreadable in the gathering darkness. "I would like that," she said simply. The church social brought together scattered homesteaders and townspeople from miles around. Miles found himself uncharacteristically concerned with his appearance, wearing a new shirt purchased months ago but never worn. As he drove Ruby to town in the ranch buggy, he noticed she had pinned her hair up with unusual care, and her green dress, while simple, had been pressed to perfection. "You look," he began, then faltered, unfamiliar with compliments. "Clean," Ruby suggested with a small smile. "It's remarkable what soap can accomplish." The church basement was transformed with paper decorations and oil lamps. A trio of local musicians played as couples moved through a Virginia reel. Miles, who normally avoided such gatherings, found himself surprisingly at ease with Ruby beside him. She knew most of the dances and guided him discreetly when he faltered. During a break in the music, Miles fetched cups of punch. As he returned, he overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. "That's Ruby Walsh with the Silver Creek foreman," whispered Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife. "Poor girl, ruined in Chicago. They say she worked in one of those houses before her brothers brought her west. Starting fresh, supposedly." "Shameful," agreed her companion. "And Miles Benton should know better. His employer won't keep a foreman who associates with fallen women." Miles stood frozen, punch cups cooling in his hands. The rumors had to be false, some frontier gossip spinning out of control. Yet as he approached Ruby, he found himself studying her with new eyes, looking for signs of deception. Had her forthright manner been an act? Was there calculation behind those green eyes? "Is something wrong?" Ruby asked as he handed her the punch. "Just tired," he lied. "Ready to go when you are." The drive back to Silver Creek passed in uncomfortable silence. Miles's mind raced with questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. The simplicity he'd found in Ruby's company was now complicated by doubt. As they approached the ranch, Ruby finally broke the silence. "You heard something about me tonight," she stated, not a question. Miles's hands tightened on the reins. "People talk." "Yes, they do," Ruby agreed, her voice steady. "Would you like to know the truth, or is the gossip enough?" The buggy rolled to a stop in front of the ranch house, but neither moved to get down. "I want the truth," Miles said finally. Ruby folded her hands in her lap, her profile illuminated by moonlight. "My husband died in the Chicago fire in '71. I was 19, with no family and no means of support. I took work as a seamstress in a house that served wealthy gentlemen. Not as a companion, but close enough for rumors. When my brothers found me last year, they insisted I come west for a fresh start. She turned to face him directly. I have never sold myself, Mr. Benton, but I have walked closer to that edge than a respectable woman should. If that makes me unsuitable company, I understand. Miles sat silently, absorbing her words. The frontier demanded harsh judgments and clear lines between right and wrong. His own code had always been rigid, necessary for survival. Yet here was Ruby, neither saint nor sinner, but a woman who had endured. I think, he said slowly, that surviving is nothing to be ashamed of. Something in Ruby's posture eased slightly, but her expression remained guarded. Many would disagree. Your reputation, my reputation, is my concern, Miles interrupted. And I've never much cared for the opinions of people who've never faced hunger. 2 days later, an unexpected visitor arrived at Silver Creek. Edward Caldwell, Miles's employer, rode in with 2 companions. The Chicago businessman had purchased the ranch 3 years earlier as an investment, visiting only occasionally to check on his property. Benton, Caldwell greeted, dismounting stiffly. Ranch is looking well. Mr. Caldwell, Miles acknowledged. Wasn't expecting you until spring. Caldwell surveyed the improved ranch house with undisguised surprise. Seems you've made some changes. I was told in town you've taken in boarders. The emphasis on the final word made Caldwell's meaning clear. The town gossip had reached him. The Walsh family is homesteading nearby, Miles explained evenly. They're paying for their keep with labor. The men have rebuilt the bunkhouse, repaired fences, and the woman. Caldwell interrupted. What exactly does she contribute? Miles felt heat rising in his face. Miss Walsh runs the household, sir. Cooking, cleaning, I've heard what she is, Caldwell said coldly. I won't have my ranch associated with scandal. They leave today, or you do. Before Miles could respond, a voice spoke from the doorway. Your house is spotless, Mr. Caldwell, Ruby said, stepping onto the porch. Your linens are clean, your pantry organized, and there's fresh bread for your journey when you decide to leave. My family and I will be gone by sunset. She turned and went back inside, closing the door quietly behind her. Miles stood rooted, a storm of emotions battling within him. His position at Silver Creek was everything he'd worked for: security, respect, a future. Walking away meant returning to the uncertainty of drifting. But as he watched Ruby through the window, calmly packing her few belongings, he recognized something he'd been denying for weeks. The frontier's harshest lesson wasn't about self-reliance. It was about recognizing what truly mattered before it was gone. Mr. Caldwell, Miles said, his voice steady. I've run this ranch for 2 years. Increased the herd by 30%. Built the North Pasture operation from nothing. Caldwell nodded impatiently. Which is why I'm giving you this chance to correct your error in judgment. My judgment is fine, Miles replied. I quit. By sunset, Miles found himself helping the Walshes unload what remained of their possessions at the Crawford homestead. The small cabin stood on a rise overlooking a creek, its newly repaired roof and chinked walls a testament to determined work. But as Ruby's brothers and their families organized their belongings, Miles recognized the inadequacy of the shelter against the approaching winter. It's not much, Ruby acknowledged, standing beside him in the yard. But it's ours. Miles looked at her, this woman who had upended his carefully ordered existence. What will you do? Survive, she answered simply. We always have. Ruby, he began, then hesitated, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. I don't want to leave you here. She studied him for a long moment. Where would you go? I have some savings, he said. Enough to buy a small spread north of here. Good water, decent grazing. I've had my eye on it for a while. And you're telling me this because? Miles removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. Because I'm asking if you'd consider coming with me. As my wife. Ruby's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am, Miles insisted. I know it's sudden. It's madness, Ruby interrupted. You barely know me. You've lost your position because of me. And now you want to what? Rescue me. No, Miles said firmly. I want to build something with you. Something real. Ruby stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. People will talk. Let them. I'm not what you think, Miles, she said softly. I'm not some perfect frontier angel. I've made mistakes. Lived through things that would shock you. I don't need perfect, Miles replied. I need real. Ruby looked away, her profile outlined against the setting sun. I'm not pretty, she whispered, the confession seemingly torn from her. Not like those girls in town with their ribbons and laces. Miles reached out, gently turning her face back toward his. That's fine, he said quietly. I need honest, not fancy. For the first time since he'd known her, Ruby's composed expression crumbled, revealing the vulnerability she'd kept hidden behind determination. I can't let you throw away everything for me. I'm not throwing away anything, Miles countered. I'm choosing what matters. That winter proved one of the harshest in Dakota Territory memory. Miles and Ruby were married by a traveling preacher in November, a simple ceremony attended by her brothers' families and a few loyal hands who'd followed Miles to his new ranch. They named it Horizon, for the place where sky met earth in a seamless joining. Their cabin was small but solid, built with help from Ruby's brothers before the first heavy snows. At night, huddled before the fire, Ruby gradually shared the full story of her life in Chicago. The desperate months after her husband's death, the humiliations endured, the narrow escape from worse fate. Miles listened, holding her through the telling, understanding that her strength had been forged in fire as surely as any cavalry saber. In turn, he revealed his own carefully guarded past, his father's murder by rustlers, his mother's subsequent decline, his years of drifting before finding purpose at Silver Creek. Each confession strengthened the bond between them, creating a foundation more solid than the cabin's stone hearth. February brought a blizzard that howled for 3 days, burying the prairie in drifts taller than a man. When it finally cleared, Miles discovered 3 of their cows frozen in a gully. The loss was significant for their small operation. We'll manage, Ruby assured him, her practical nature a balm to his concern. The others will calve in spring. But April brought new challenges. As the snow melted, revealing the winter-starved prairie, a band of desperate men began raiding isolated homesteads. The sheriff, overwhelmed and understaffed, could offer little protection to outlying ranches. Miles reinforced their doors and kept his rifle loaded, but worry gnawed at him constantly, especially when he needed to ride out to check on the herd. The thought of Ruby alone made him reconsider his lifelong belief in self-reliance. For the first time, he understood that independence could be a weakness rather than strength. His fears proved justified on a clear May morning. Returning from tracking a missing heifer, Miles spotted smoke rising from the direction of their cabin. He spurred his horse mercilessly, heart pounding with dread. The scene that greeted him was unexpected. Ruby stood in the doorway, shotgun braced against her shoulder. Before her lay a man, clutching his thigh where blood seeped through his fingers. 2 horses were tethered nearby, one bearing a hastily strapped body. What happened? Miles demanded, leaping from his mount. They thought I'd be easy, Ruby said, her voice remarkably steady. This one will live, though he might limp. His friend made a worse decision. The wounded raider glared up at Miles. Control your woman, he spat. Shot Jim dead before we even cleared leather. Miles looked at Ruby with new eyes. This woman, who tenderly nursed orphan calves and sang softly while kneading bread, had defended their home with deadly efficiency. My wife, Miles said deliberately, doesn't need controlling. The sheriff, when he finally arrived to collect the prisoner and his dead companion, was similarly impressed. Most women would have panicked, he observed. You're lucky, Benton. Luck has nothing to do with it, Miles replied. That night, holding Ruby close beneath their quilts, Miles felt the last of his old beliefs crumbling away. The frontier wasn't a place for lone wolves. It was a forge where partnerships were either strengthened or broken. I was wrong, he whispered into the darkness. About what? Ruby murmured sleepily. About everything. I thought strength meant needing no one. I was wrong. Ruby shifted to look at him, her face barely visible in the fading firelight. We're stronger together, she agreed. That's what I tried to tell my first husband, but he wouldn't listen. Men can be stubborn that way. Miles chuckled. Is that so? Absolutely, Ruby said, settling back against his chest. Fortunately, you're slightly less stubborn than most. By their first anniversary, Horizon Ranch had begun to prosper. The spring calving had been successful, and Miles had added a small apple orchard that Ruby insisted would thrive despite the harsh Dakota climate. Their cabin had expanded to include a proper bedroom and larger kitchen. News arrived that Caldwell had sold Silver Creek after a disastrous year under new management. The new owners, a cattle company from Wyoming, had retained some of Miles's former hands but transformed the operation into something unrecognizable. "Do you regret leaving?" Ruby asked as they sat on their porch watching summer lightning play across distant clouds. Miles considered the question honestly. "I regret nothing that brought me here," he said finally. "This is where I belong." Ruby smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her slightly rounded belly. "Good," she said, "because soon there will be 3 of us belonging here." The revelation struck Miles with joy so intense it was almost painful. A child, something he'd never allowed himself to imagine in his solitary plans. The frontier suddenly seemed both more dangerous and more precious, a legacy rather than merely a proving ground. "Are you happy?" he asked, needing to hear the words. Ruby looked out at their land, the cabin they'd built, the cattle grazing on the hillside, the garden beginning to yield its first harvest. Then she turned to him, her green eyes reflecting the coming dusk. "I never expected happiness," she admitted. "Just survival. But you've given me both." Miles pulled her close, thinking of the distance they'd traveled, not just across the prairie, but from their separate solitudes to this shared life. "You were wrong, you know," he murmured against her hair. "About what?" "When you said you weren't pretty." He tilted her chin up, meeting her gaze directly. "You're beautiful in all the ways that matter." Ruby's smile, open and unguarded, was his answer. On the Dakota frontier, where truth was often harsh and beauty rare, they had found something honest, enduring, and wholly their own. In December, as winter again wrapped the prairie in white silence, Ruby gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a declaration of faith in the future they were building together. Miles, holding his child for the first time, understood completely what had been missing in his years of self-imposed isolation. The frontier hadn't changed. It remained beautiful and brutal, generous and merciless. But Miles had changed, transformed by the recognition that true strength came not from standing alone, but from the courage to build connections in a world that constantly threatened to break them. As Ruby watched them from her bed, exhausted but radiant, Miles made a silent promise to both his wife and daughter. Here at Horizon, where earth met sky, they would create a home where honesty trumped pretense, where substance mattered more than appearance, and where love, sturdy and unpretentious as the land itself, would endure.